Now, Justice Raymond Zondo has been appointed Chief Justice of the Republic of South Africa by President Cyril Ramaphosa as of the 1st of April this year. The only female candidate contesting the position, Justice Mandisa Maya, will likely take up the position of Deputy Chief Justice. Let's get some reaction on this. I'm joined by Thabo Masombuka, who's a senior legal and transformation consultant. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. What do you make of this decision? Does it come as a surprise?
Good afternoon. I can't seem to hear you.
Okay, just good afternoon. Yes, thank you for joining us. I wanted to get your take on what you make of the decision. There's been a lot of talk around whether or not the conversation around transformation has come to the forefront with Justice Raymond Zondo being appointed. What's your take?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, the appointment of Acting Chief Justice Zondo has raised a whole lot of argument in the legal and public arena, precisely because the President departed from what a lot of people expected would have been the recommendation of the JSC. But what one needs to remember is that it appears that what the President did was to correct the previous departure of succession in the bench. If you recall, the previous president overlooked the acting Chief Justice at the time, Judge Thabo Masombuka, which was a sour in the grape in the mouths of many people. It looks like through this appointment, what the President is doing is to say there has to be a natural succession on the bench. And a Deputy Chief Justice needs to logically succeed the Chief Justice so that there is a proper succession of legal expertise. And I'm sure you would have seen the statement also says that the President intends appointing the current, President of the SCA, Mandisa Maya, Justice Mandisa Maya, to take over as a Deputy Chief Justice. The logical expectation from my view is that once Judge Zondo leaves the office, either through resignation or retirement, whichever comes first, then Justice Mandisa Maya will then succeed her as the new Chief Justice. I think that's a logical thing to do.
The other talk is the President telling journalists that he was surprised that the JSC had gone as far as recommending its preferred candidate. And after he spoke of that, other legal bodies weighed in to also say that they shared the same sentiment, saying that the JSC had unconstitutionally sought to usurp the appointment powers of the President. How does that bode with you?
It would be rather too harsh to suggest and imply that the JSC acted unconstitutionally. One would rather say the JSC acted rather out of the ordinary and unconventionally. Remember, there is no specific prescribed format and manner in which the JSC needs to recommend to the President. All that the Act says and the Constitution says, the President has to consult through the JSC and the leaders of the political parties, major political parties in Parliament. But it doesn't say the JSC has to recommend a particular individual. What we saw in this round of interviews was quite out of the ordinary and unconventional. Let me remind you of an incident before Mogoeng was appointed, Justice Mogoeng. If you recall, and the former Deputy Chief Justice Thabo Masombuka dedicates a chapter in his book, All Rise, the Judicial Memo, a painful chapter where he says he was an acting Chief Justice at the time when Ngobo had retired. Then President Jacob Zuma wrote to him as an acting Chief Justice at the time and informed him that please convene the JSC. I intend appointing Mogoeng as the Chief Justice. That was quite out of the ordinary and quite painful, because you are being overlooked, but on top of being overlooked, you are instructed to initiate a process that will overlook you. That was quite uncharacteristic. So in my view, I think what the president was seeking to do through this round is to say, notwithstanding, I know a lot of people ask the question, but Judge Raymond Zondo is left with 2.5 years to retire. Why would the president still consider? I think in my view, the president was trying to reinstall the culture of succession, the culture of a pattern of succession to ensure that there is stability in the succession of the of the highest office in the judiciary. The only difficulty now is that Justice Zondo, having been the chair of that Zondo State of Capture Commission, has got himself deeply involved in a number of issues that are incontrovertible today. And one asks and wonders whether outcomes of that report, which he has handed over to the president in parts, will be subject to legal scrutiny and reviews. What will happen when some of the reviews eventually reach the Constitutional Court? Ordinarily and logically, he would be expected to recuse himself presiding over some of the cases where his outcomes are subject to review.
What do you think would be the compelling cases for the president to deviate from the logical succession?
The president, remember, was never obliged, and this is what I mentioned earlier, the president was never obliged to follow the recommended candidate. And we have accepted right now that this JSC round of interviews have departed with an ordinary norm where they've expressly mentioned the candidate. And the Constitution is very clear, is that the president acting under, in terms of Section 174, will consider all aspects and factors put into play. Of course, there are politics now. There's a school of thought that says the president chose the acting Chief Justice Zondo because of the project incomplete to ensure that the spy tapes eventually, not the spy tapes, the envelopes are never sealed, are never unsealed. Well, it's arguable. The defect of that argument is that should the matter of the envelopes, for instance, evolve to the Constitutional Court, Justice Zondo, even if he's a judge president, does not have a veto power over all judges of the Constitutional Court. That matter will be subject to legal scrutiny based on its legal soundness and argument. So if effectively the president was never going to necessarily be obliged by the outcomes of the JSC. So this begs the question, how effective is a JSC process in its deliberation? And a lot of scholars and a lot of commentators have already said the mannerism in which the representation takes place at the JSC is deeply political, highly compromised, persona non grata invented, in the sense that you look at the questions that were lodged against towards the president of the North Gauteng, for instance, Judge Mlambo. Some of those questions were, for all intents and purposes, not necessarily testing the suitability of the candidate in terms of competence and leadership. They were rumor-mongering type of questions which seeks to attack the integrity of an individual. So surely there is a case to review the mannerism and the approach in dealing with the JSC-related recommendations.
Absolutely. We are going to have to leave it there for now. Of course, really answering the questions around the affirmation of the narrative that the president may be protected through this decision. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Speaking there to Thabo Masombuka, Senior Legal and Transformation Consultant.